So, morning everybody, and thanks for that introduction, Simon. So, I've done my introduction, and I know we're sort of running a little delayed for our schedule. So, we were due to have about 40 minutes, which the clock is still counting that. It just means you're a bit delayed going to the coffee break, I'm afraid. But yeah, I think without further ado, I mean, obviously we've heard from 3 of our panellists today, but I will just come to each, and then I'll give Mel a chance for an introduction. So, Jake, could I come to you in the context of just introducing perhaps your background as well as what you're doing today at Alchemab and what you'll bring to this panel session, please?
Yes, yeah. So I've spoken about Alchemab. Yeah, so perhaps to introduce myself. So my background is kind of in immunology and computational biology. And really, I've spent the last 15 years or so developing new technologies for developing antibody therapeutics. And I'm just kind of excited by big scientific challenges and new technology. It's kind of exactly the kind of thing we're doing at Alchemab. So what will I bring to the panel? Perhaps a different kind of perspective on ways of harnessing the body's defenses. So I think we typically think about immunotherapies when we think about harnessing the body's defenses, but the kind of Alchemab approach is a slightly different way of harnessing the body's defenses, as well as maybe some thoughts on any kind of technology innovations that are going on here in this area. Lovely,
thank you, Jake. James, if I might, with the many hats that you wear today, as well as perhaps your previous experience, what do you want to bring today?
So I think the main thing for me is it's really interesting hearing you guys talk about certainly what you were saying about those sort of resilient and resistant individuals, and really how we have 2 problems in the pre-hospital space. One is it's a really under sort of researched area. I think a lot of the disease that you even what I've talked about today, or similar in terms of your drug discovery and development, none of it's really focused on that really early on hyperacute phase. And actually it was really interesting, when you were talking about these resilient individuals. If we just take the example of cardiac arrest, so again, 50% of the work that we're doing, if everybody here now had a cardiac arrest, just this row of people on the end would survive, which is quite scary. Yeah, maybe. So we know despite all the improvement in medical care over 40, 50, 60 years in terms of management of cardiac arrest, we've not really had any change in the survival. And actually there's something about that's really interesting what you brought up around resilient individuals that we see day to day, and actually that's who are the survivors from cardiac arrest. So we go to lots of different patients, and the vast majority of people have cardiac arrest secondary to a heart attack. That's the most common thing that we see. And really how long you're in cardiac arrest determines obviously the likelihood that you are going to survive. The longer you are in cardiac arrest, the longer your brain's not had oxygen for, and therefore, even if we get your heart started with all the kit, actually, are you still going to be as functionally sort of able as you were, even if you leave hospital? And there's no real rhyme or reason as to who those patients are who we restart their heart. So we all know that if we do CPR and get shot and things like that, that's great for you. But actually, we'll also go to the people who didn't really have a lot of that chain. Their heart hasn't started for the first 45, 50 minutes by the time we get there. Then we'll get there and it will restart, and those patients will leave hospital. And they'll be exactly the same group of patients as your 40-year-old man who has a cardiac arrest in the gym, who has everything going for him and the complete chain of survival, and he doesn't survive. And what you say about the resistant and sort of resilient individuals is fascinating. I wonder whether that has part of it.
You're making me think we need to branch into this area.
Maybe we'll talk after. But actually, yeah, whether there is something about that resistance in the blood-brain barrier that you're much more resilient to hypoxic insult in certain patient groups.
Lovely, thank you. Simon, anything in addition you'd like to add as your intro?
I think I want to buy myself a mobile defibrillator so I can be assured of survival. So from my perspective, I'm a patent attorney. I've been in the profession for 24 plus years. And what I often say is we tend, as patent attorneys, we tend to see things on our desk about 10 years before it hits the clinic. Sometimes it's longer than that. You know, I've been involved in cases where there's only been a couple of years left of the patent life, which is 20 years before something's actually hitting the clinic. So from my perspective, I get to see a lot of the new technologies coming on stream about 10 years in advance. And also, it's not just the new technologies which are being developed, but also combinations of, say, for personalized medicines, you know, there's the diagnostics component coupled with the therapeutic and also new ways of drug delivery. So a lot of interesting new tech and also repurposing of existing tech to make it more efficacious for the patient. And really interesting listening to James's presentation about the difference in temperature on the aircraft. I don't think of that because when I get on a commercial airliner, it's the same temperature. But I once saw a presentation recently by an astronaut who'd done some DNA sequencing in space, and it's really interesting how just paring back and making the kit and the diagnostics so simple that it can be used anywhere has it's really impressive that it's being used on a space station, but actually it has a real world implication in being able to use a diagnostic kit in a backwater in Africa where they don't have any cold storage. So some of that technology is really interesting and moving things forward.
Thank you very much, Simon. And just on that space note, there is a conference next week as well around space and biotech. So if people are interested and want to hear more, then there'll be people around, and Nucleus are one of the sponsors of that. But Mel, could I come to you in your role at AZ, but also in your expertise? What do you want to bring to this panel and opening remarks?
Sure, yeah, so hi, I'm Mel Leveridge. I'm a Vice President in the Discovery Sciences organisation at AstraZeneca. So in that role I lead a team who develop biological reagents, assays and run compound profiling and mechanistic studies to develop the next generation of medicines. We sit in very early discovery. Prior to joining AstraZeneca, I was at GSK for 19 years. We always sat in that kind of early discovery pharma environment. I also recently joined the One Nucleus board, so great to work with Tony and the team in that capacity. So from the point of view of the panel, what I'd be delighted to talk about is some of the novel kind of drug modalities that we're developing at AstraZeneca and more broadly in the pharma sector to tackle disease and develop new medicines by harnessing the immune system. And I think excitingly to treat disease, but actually also potentially now also to cure disease. And I think that's a really exciting kind of paradigm shift that we're living through at the moment. So looking forward to talking more about that.
Lovely, thank you. And yeah, as an immunologist myself, I'm delighted to be chairing this panel, not least of all because when I was at Johnson & Johnson Innovation, leading the immunology therapy area across EMEA, I said irrespective of how pharma sliced up their therapeutic areas, whether it was cardiovascular, virology, neuroscience, understanding the immune system was at the heart of any one of those. So, and again, having worked from target discovery through to product launch and life cycle management of a blockbuster drug in chronic inflammatory diseases, it's really impactful. What was really powerful for me in your presentation in particular, Jake, was around how the bedside, we talk about bench to bedside, but actually it's bedside to bench to bedside. And so really bringing that to the forefront. So thank you very much. So yeah, what's from your particular domains with your day jobs and your experiences, what do you feel that the role of the immune system and those opportunities are to modulate the immune system, target the immune system for patient benefit? I'm perhaps going to come to you, Mel. You talked about cure just now. We've heard about some of that, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think we have a number of opportunities now to harness the immune system, in particular patients' T cells, to tackle disease. So I'll maybe just mention a few of the kind of drug modalities that we're working on and the broader sector are working on that enable us to do that. So for one exciting area and growing area, I think, is T cell engagers. So these are bispecific molecules, antibodies that recruit and activate patients' T cells and then target them to cells that we either want to kill in the case of oncology or deplete potentially in autoimmune disorders. And so I say that's a growing area. I think that's been kind of led through hematological cancers. That's been the area that is most advanced. But the technology is really evolving. So AstraZeneca, we've published on our Titan T-cell engager platform. So that's a platform that more selectively targets CD8 positive T-cells rather than CD4 positive T-cells. We believe gives a better profile of the molecule that will enable us to move from oncology indications now more into autoimmune. So I think that's, we're seeing there's molecules in the clinic now for those indications. So we're seeing, I guess, these technologies to harness the immune system, which perhaps starts more focused on oncology and cell death, now broadening into immune disorders as well. In terms of cure, clearly cell therapy is a really hot area at the moment, needs no introduction, I'm sure, to this audience, CAR T therapies, TCR-T therapies. Again, really the idea being that we're harnessing the body's own T cells to target, selectively kill diseased cells and tissues. And really, again, that gives us the potential for cure, a once and done therapy. And recent advances in that field, moving from a situation where we have to remove a patient's T cells, engineer them outside the body, and then the patient has to undergo kind of immunosuppression before we can then reintroduce the T cells. Now we're moving to a place where we can do in vivo cell therapy. So this really transforms what could be curative therapies from something which has to be done, in a hospital setting, can take weeks, to something which now is more of an IV treatment that can be done in a few days. And so that's a really exciting development there. And then finally, because my background is more in synthetic modalities, I've talked a lot about biologics, but my background is really more in sort of small molecule drug discovery. So not so much harnessing the immune system, but I guess modulating the immune system. I think it's exciting. We're now starting to see oral molecules, so both orally formulated peptides and small molecules that can target cytokines like TNF-alpha, for example. We're now seeing a number of biotechs beginning to enter the clinic with oral molecules against cytokines. So modulating, agonizing the immune system, but through oral. And that's really important from a patient access point of view and for the most part also a cost of goods perspective. So I think, a number of really exciting modalities that we're now seeing in the clinic, both biologics and synthetics, that modulate the immune system for patient benefit.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to come in the context of the modulating the immune system for patient benefit? And I think perhaps James, you see you're the one on this panel that come into contact with patients on a hourly basis.
Yeah, I think, like I say, there's not much change in terms of the medication that we're using right at that sort of hyperacute phase of care in the two biggest pathologies that we see, traumatic brain injury and cardiac arrest, essentially hypoxic brain injury. I think there is probably further work to do at that early stage of care, and actually all of the sort of research and clinical stuff we all talk about, you were saying in the clinic, it's all in hospital, and it probably doesn't even really, it's only just started to come towards the front door of at the emergency department where research in emergency medicine has really taken off a bit more. It's still nowhere near what you see in oncology, cardiovascular. I mean, if you go to an oncology clinic, almost every patient that you'll see in that clinic will be in some form of clinical trial. And actually, we translate that to our traumatic brain injury group, potentially in neurocritical care, that they're getting a bit more involved in that sort of thing. Certainly in the emergency department, we have 400 patients a day coming through, and we enroll about 10 to 15 into some form of clinical trial at the front door. You can clearly see that's a really underrepresented group, and actually in the pre-hospital space, that cohort gets smaller and smaller, and that has to be balanced as well with the immediate priorities, which we have to deal with right at the time of the incident. But there's definitely probably an unmet clinical need there of even just involved in sort of sampling patients, for example, really early in that phase of care, and then looking at trajectories. And we're using the biomarker stuff that we talked about as almost as a predictor as well of outcome. And we can see patients who have phenomenally high GFAP results within 10, 15 minutes of their collapse or their injury. And we can absolutely see the association with outcomes so early on, but actually taking that blood sample at the time of injury, potentially at arrival at the emergency department again in the hospital setting, if a bit later on, perhaps we could use those biomarkers as a trajectory of prognostication.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think also that for that biomarker piece in the context of clinical trial inclusion as well, how can we speed up the clinical trial and patient enrolment within clinical trials so that, again, coming to the IP piece for companies, that amplifies and extends their patent longevity, but it's coming to market access much quicker and many more patients getting to benefit. So maybe bring in some of those in the context perhaps of what you're seeing, Simon, around biomarkers and that predictive, prognostic.
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot of interest in biomarkers. There's a slight problem with patenting those in the US because they are typically seen as a discovery due to some fairly recent case law in the US. But I still think there's a lot of value in that. And I think one of the problems is you'll have a bank of biomarkers and there'll be maybe 25 and some are up-regulated, some are down-regulated, and you really need to focus in from a patent point of view on which ones are the important ones. Otherwise, you have to file about 25 different patent applications, which is incredibly costly. I think there's always been a connection with patenting and the regulatory environment as well, whereby you file the patent application, you're doing the clinical trials, the regulation will keep on going on in the background until you've got the market authorization, and there are mechanisms in the patent patent field to extend the life of the patents. Just going back to, I think, your original question about what you think is quite exciting in immunomodulation as a therapy. The thing that I think is one of the best things for patients is something that's pretty much plug and play or platform technology where it doesn't have to be very expensive and very bespoke for an individual patient. You want something whereby it's either broadly applicable to multiple patient cohorts, it's very easy to identify those cohorts, or you have something which is very easily adaptable for a particular patient. So if you take, say, mRNA vaccines, I think COVID wasn't great generally, but actually it brought those therapeutics into the clinic probably 10 years before they would have ordinarily got through. So I think those sort of platform technologies are really exciting technologies for me as an outsider looking in.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think that also feeds in back to, if we think about the cell therapies, for example, and you were talking about some of the autologous approaches, which is very patient specific, but is also, it's very costly, burdensome, takes time, and the patient still needs to benefit in the time that they're waiting. And certainly we, when I was in my pharma life, we were very interested in that yin and yang of the immune system, where you've got an abundance of maybe effector cells or a dysregulation of the regulatory T cells. And we were very much interested in that CAR-T reg. So taking, again, what you said, coming from oncology and then bringing some of those findings and insights into the autoimmune space. Fantastic. I'm going to keep us to time, but I'd like to also, I think we've touched on some of the future trends that you might be thinking about, excited by, seeing already, that you can perhaps talk about. But what future trends, but also strategies, might we need to consider so that we can enable successful clinical adoption? So big, lofty needs, and we're not going to solve it in the next 10 minutes before the coffee break. But what future trends and strategies from your particular companies or domains do you feel we need to embark upon?
I mean, certainly, as you mentioned, around the challenges around technology advancement and things. So again, therapeutics aside, so if you just take the diagnostics as an example, you talk about it's expensive to do patents and biomarkers and things like that, and you can look at GFAP is probably going to be the leading biomarker in traumatic brain injury, and we'll see that probably replace CT scanning in hospitals. And actually the market there is all in patients with mild head injury. So you've had a knock with your head with your colleague or whatever, playing a football match, sort of teammate injury, ball to the head, whatever it is, but you're well enough that you made yourself to hospital. You sit in our department for anywhere between 4 and 8 hours. You get a CT scan at that point. It's negative, and you go home. And you have all the challenges of mild head injury and concussion and post-concussion syndrome, and you're probably lost in the ether of the sort of system in that way. But actually, that whole process, potentially, with the introduction of biomarkers, is going to be massively streamlined. So you'll come to the emergency department, you'll have your biomarker, it's probably going to be negative, and you can go home. And it avoids all the faff of the CT scan and the delay in hospital. It will probably identify a group that we miss at the moment, because if you CT scan, anyone who's had a head injury and has had a CT scan, and yeah, hopefully it's normal, you're discharged from hospital, and we say, yeah, CT is normal, you can go home. And actually, the patient journey absolutely doesn't end there. And it does for us in the emergency department in our role, but all the cognitive impact, the effects of going back to work, and we know the patients with a mild head injury have a significant sort of effect on their quality of life going forward. But actually, your CT scan is normal, so you're discharged. And actually, biomarkers is probably going to introduce a new group of patients that we're going to have to manage that have probably been unmet in the past. But also translating that technology to a different group of patients, which is what we do. We see very few patients with severe traumatic brain injury in relation to the number of patients who come to the emergency department. So we're not a great market for Abbott to get their millions of pounds. I presume they've spent on your, like legal fees or whatever it is that cost.
I wish.
Started already.
So our job is to translate that technology, and we go, actually, that's a bit of technology that, yeah, it's being used and it's marketed and it's licensed for use of mild head injury, but we see that there's a real use there in the pre-hospital space. But like you say, around the technology, we can't just bring that device on board. It has to be, it only works between, I think it's something like 10 and 30 degrees, which when we introduced the project in January, we sort of went out and we were like, oh, it'll be all right, probably, but we'll put it in like a jiffy bag sort of thing and it'll be fine. And we never got results in the first few weeks because it was temperature out of range, temperature out of range, temperature out of range. We put hand warmers, like when you go skiing, like it's basic stuff that we're trying to warm up this machine. And actually now we've partnered with a team, I think they're based at Babraham actually, Upfront Diagnostics, a small startup.
Bridge-based.
Yeah. Who have introduced a lateral flow test device. And you mentioned off the back of COVID, they've introduced a lateral flow test device for GFAP. And actually, if that's a 2% of the price of what the machine that you see outside is, and it's not as needing to be around the temperature, and it can cope with the vibration of the aircraft and things like that, and it's a sort of one test use and we can throw it away and it's 50 quid a pop, then actually that's going to be a real improvement. So hopefully that's a really exciting area that we're looking forward to work with. And that's an example of sort of working with small industry and startups that we're really sort of only tapping into in that really early stage.
I think you're touching on a couple of themes that really kind of translate across the sectors. One being kind of the patient experience, I suppose, with some of these things. Again, that's I think really important because that will drive access to these therapies. I think as the technology evolves and say we're talking about if something becomes an IV injection instead of weeks of treatment in hospital setting, then that the patient experience is so much improved. And also can be, access can be broadened across geographies and so on. And then also, you talk about the developing the devices that can be used in various settings. I think that has some synergies, I guess, with kind of ease of manufacturing from a pharma, from a sort of medicines, drug discovery point of view. And again, I think a lot of the advances that we're seeing, if future looking, it's how can we improve the technology such that the manufacturing routes are more straightforward, which in turn then drives a lower cost of goods, which clearly is a big consideration with, in particular, some of these more curative therapies, this kind of once and done type therapies. So yeah, that kind of patient experience and access, for me, are key themes that are kind of driving the future technology development in this space.
Thank you.
I think there's kind of there's patient access and patient journey and cost clearly really important, but actually the clinician journey almost, I feel like, and the point about biomarkers, this is going to be of real growing importance because we're kind of moving on from blunt immunotherapies that just suppress, activate the immune system. You're developing all these cool modalities. We're kind of getting much more fine-grained function. So it's really about fine-tuning the immune system, and we're going to have lots of different therapies that fine-tune different elements of the immune system in different ways. And that's going to get really complex for clinicians to navigate. I don't know how that's going to work. So how do you know what therapy to give to what patient at what time? And I think biomarkers are a really important aspect of that, which are perhaps often a little bit of an afterthought, but we need to bring earlier. Maybe also, I don't know if I dare touch on it a bit, but kind of AI assistance for clinicians to kind of help with that decision-making process.
Yes, I mean that's a huge area of development. It's not my expertise at all, but we work with. So more recently, we've been working with the University of Michigan to develop AI algorithms to determine your invasive blood pressure and try and make, again, that's something we can talk about afterwards. But it's a huge piece of work really that's been done to try and really focus on patient-specific treatment. I go back to cardiac arrest, and actually all our national guideline is to treat every single person exactly the same, which we know that their response is not the same, and clearly that makes no pathophysiological sense at all. And actually, the use of AI into differentiating those patients, but really early on, then you talk about medication to give, and actually the diagnostic uncertainty is so huge, and that's where we found that the use of biomarkers has been fascinating, because like plasma may be the answer for traumatic brain injury really early on, but identifying the patient with because what we don't want to do is give plasma to a load of patients who don't have traumatic brain injury, and actually if we get to hospital, is that too late? Have they already had that breakdown in the blood-brain barrier that causes that immunomodulatory effects and the cerebral inflammatory effects, etc.? And actually, if we can bring that really early on in the right patient group, then potentially that's a way of preventing the secondary brain injury. And really, it's looking like biomarkers are going to be the only way at the moment in terms of diagnostics. There is some stuff around AI and diagnostics, but because it's so dynamic and every single patient is so different early on in that disease process, I'm not sure it's probably going to. I'll probably have a job for a few more years.
And I think it is about that that patient, let's call it stratification for want of better expression as well. And I think, that was what I was referring to in the context of the clinical trials. There are quite inventive ways to speed up that and not needing to keep running the same placebo-controlled trials, actually using the big data sets that are available, so that actually that, it doesn't seem to be moving as quickly as I would like, but then I'm naturally very impatient, or that patients need. But those are ways in which that can speed up those clinical trials, those patient inclusion, without having to put even more time and pressure in the system. Any sort of final comments? We are running to time now. Any sort of final nuggets that people want to sum up that they haven't got across? Did you want to come back on your IP banter?
Well, it's hard to come back when you're being pitched as a villain. No, I certainly think AI's got a role. We see more and more inventions coming through which has an AI component, and biomarkers is one area where you can very easily look at a bank of 20, 30, 50 biomarkers and use AI to try and work out disease state, modality, what drug might work best. So yeah, I think that's certainly coming.
Lovely, thank you. Well, we will close now so that we can go to the coffee break, and I think all of the panellists and previous speakers will be around. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you in the coffee break.